Okay, we're gonna start in a couple seconds. Daniel, can I make you co-host and you let people in?
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. Great. Okay. Okay. So welcome everybody. This is our first shiur, and hopefully we'll be able to do this for a very long time together. We're gonna be looking at the kriya on the Chorban. Okay, that's gonna be our first sugya. So some of you probably have looked at the Marmakomos and have seen the source sheets. Maybe some of you have even have watched the shiurim, the shiur, excuse me, on YouTube that I prepared. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna run quickly through the Marmakomos, run through the source sheets. What's interesting about this group that we have is that it's people from all different backgrounds. So it's pretty exciting, and everybody here I know personally. So I'm gratified that you're here. Okay, so I'm going to go through quickly, review the questions, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to present the svar. I'm going to present one overarching explanation, and that overarching explanation will hopefully allow us then to answer all the questions. That's the general methodology that I use in all my shiurim. Go through the Marakomos, collect facts, see things that are inconsistent with previous assumptions, and those inconsistencies create questions. Sometimes you see contradictions. Those will also create questions. So, and as we go through, we'll see. Okay. So, and this is going to be an in-depth shiur. This is not an easy shiur. These will never be like Musar Shurim. They're never going to be like, okay, and the lesson that we learned from his is the following and how to improve ourselves. And they're not going to be philosophical Shurim. They're all going to be very mechanical, technical halachic Shurim. Okay, they're not going to, but they're also not going to help us understand halacha l'maisa so much. And as we'll see as we go along, obviously practical halacha, but we're not gonna see really how to act so much. That's not the goal. Okay, the goal is really just to understand how the halachos that we study are operating on a mechanical level. That's really our goal. Okay, okay, and if anybody has any questions at any point, so please feel free just to turn on your microphone and ask. Don't wait for somebody to call on you or recognize. It's just I'm not going to be able to focus on so many things at once. So just simply say, hold on 1 second, I got a question, and then go into it. Okay. Okay. So we start off the sugya here with the first source, which is a pasuk in Yirmiyahu. Okay, and the pasuk says as follows: it says, "V'yavo anashim mishchem mishilo mishomron shmonim ish v'gachei zakan orkai begadim u'misgadim u'mincha lavona biyadam lahavi beis Hashem." Okay, so you have these 80 guys, 80 men are coming down 6 months after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash to give a korban. The news hasn't hit them yet. Okay, so the news hasn't hit them, and they're coming down to give korbanos in the Beis Hamikdash. The Radak explained, they didn't realize when they left. Now again, this is about a 45-minute drive, maybe an hour's drive. But figure you're going on a donkey, you're bringing animals with you, so it's a little longer. Okay, so when they heard on the way, somebody told them, so they ripped their shirts and they shaved their beards. So how did they not hear about this, right? So this is the Radak's question. How in the world do they not hear? They're sitting in Shiloh and Shechem and in the Shomron. How could they not possibly have known that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed? Okay, so what they figured was that not everybody was not everything had been destroyed. Now, the Bnei Israel had some of them had been exiled, but the Beis Hamikdash still stood. They couldn't believe that they couldn't even contemplate the idea that the Babylonians had destroyed the Beis Hamikdash. So now imagine the shock that they're on the way to Yerushalayim and they hear that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. So they So they tear their clothing, right? They tear their clothing. And then they hear that Gedaliah, who was Ben Yoakim, who was a great Talmid Chacham and a great scholar at the time, had been left as the governor of the land by the Babylonians. So they went to visit him, and that's to see what they should do. Okay, so that's really the source that we have for this idea of tearing when we see the destruction of Jerusalem. That's where this comes from. Okay, from these men who themselves tore over the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, the Gemara says as follows: Okay, so these are the people that we tear our shirts over, and we're not allowed to repair them. Now today, nobody repairs their shirts when they tear Kriya, even if they're allowed to, because shirts don't cost so much, right? But back then, clothing was very expensive. It took a huge portion of one's annual income, and people generally had one or two changes of clothing. That's it, right? Some people didn't even have a special Shabbat set of clothing, right? They literally wore the same exact thing just about every single day. So if you tore your robe or your clothing for the Beis Hamikdash or for your parent or somebody sitting shiva for over mourning, so that was a very big deal. So you'd want to repair it. So the halacha is you're only allowed to repair it over certain rips, over certain things that you rip for. Okay, so and these are the ones that you're not allowed to. Okay, these are the ones you're not allowed to. So it says Koriel Aviv al Imo, your parents, Va'rabo Shalimdo Torah, and your Rebbe that taught you Torah, Val Nasi on the president, right? Then it was Nasi was the head of the Jewish community. Val Av Beis Din, the head of the Beit Din. Val Shmuas Haras. So this is the Rambam is going to define it as like most of the Jews die, right? So if most of the Jews of the world die, so then that's one tear. Birchas Hashem, if you hear somebody blasphemize, Al Sefer Torah Shenisraf, if your Torah, God forbid, is burnt, Ari Huda, Al Mikdash Yerushalayim. And here's where we come in on the cities of Judah, on the Mikdash, and on Yerushalayim. The Kori Al Mikdash and Mosif Al Yerushalayim. And if you hit the Beis Hamikdash first, then you tear more when you get to Yerushalayim. Okay, so Ari Yehuda Minolan. And so then the Gemara goes through and quotes different psukim to prove the fact that each the cities of Judah, the Temple Mount, and Yerushalayim that you rip for all of them. Okay, and then it goes on to say that if you see if you see Yerushalayim first and then you see the Makom Mikdash, then you tear again. Okay, so we had three questions here that bothered us. The first question is, what about these three places require us to tear our clothing? Okay, what do they have? Now again, I want to make sure something's very clear here. We're never going to be asking the question of why. Okay, we're not asking why. We're always going to be asking what and how. Those are our questions. Sometimes where or what, but we're not asking why. When a question sounds like a why question, what we're really asking is what characteristic about it generates the halacha that we're learning. Okay, that's the real question that we're asking. We're not really asking an actual why question. Okay, here are the questions that we're asking. So what about these three places require us to tear? Okay, the three places that are destroyed, right? So how did we get to so we have an idea of Kriya is really based on a parent's death. Okay, so it's extended to great people's deaths, extended to your Rebbe's death, fine. Okay, but now all of a sudden it's not about a personal relationship anymore. Now it's about a place. So how did Kriya then extend to a place? Okay, and what about these three places requires a tear for each of the places? In other words, let's say I take my annual trip to Israel and I see one of the places. Okay, so I ripped. So it's one of the places. I got it, right? So now I gotta rip for each and every single one. Why are each of these unique, right? As it's all the same thing. They were all destroyed when the temple was destroyed. So if they're all right, it's all essentially commemorating the same destructive event. So why is it that each of them requires us to tear? Okay, and what about Yerushalayim? Okay, this is you see the Rambam in the next source is gonna highlight this. The Rambam says Mishra Ari Huda b'chorbanam Omer Ari Kachecha Hayu Midbar v'Korei Ra Yerushalayim b'chorbanam Yerushalayim Midbar Beis Hamikdash b'chorban Omer Beis Hamikdash Tarteinu b'Korei Umehechan Chayav v'Korah Min Atzofim Shegil Hamikdash Korei Echad Yimpaga b'Hamikdash Tchila K'Shiyavo Midarcha Midbar Korei Hamikdash Umosif Yerushalayim. So Yeah, I would never understand this halacha if I didn't live where I live, because this is literally, this happens to me every single day. The Gemara had a hard time understanding how anybody can come into Israel from the east. Okay, so like coming in from Jordan, even though I don't know why they had so much trouble understanding this, because when they wrote this, they were standing in the east in Babylonia. So I'm not sure why they had so much trouble. If they were going into Israel, that's how they would enter. And just about the Bnei Israel, when they came into Israel, they came in from Jordan. So I don't know why this, but this just seemed like very strange to them that anyone would come to Yerushalayim not from, let's say, Tel Aviv. I don't know, maybe they were foreseeing the fact that Ben Gurion Airport would be built in the west of Israel, not the east. But I don't know. So that's I'm not sure why they have so much trouble. So if it happens to be,
Rabbi, wouldn't it be that they all came in from the north? Because when you're coming from Babylonia, I believe you go through Syria and Lebanon to Israel.
It depends which way you're going. It could be. It's
but isn't Jordan
possible. Right. It's something. These men that we learned about in Yirmiyahu, they were coming from the north. They were coming from the Shomron, which is northeast. So if they came straight down, from the north, it depends on what angle you're coming in, I guess. But if you've been to Hebrew U, to the Hebrew U campus in Mount Scopus, so that's Sofim. That's what they're talking about here. They're talking about if you happen to come in from the east. So the city of David, which was the city of Jerusalem, it's not the old city of today, but the city of David, which is outside today's old city. So that's what's considered Yerushalayim. When we talk about Yerushalayim, that's what we're talking about. So if you came in from the east, you'd come in and you'd see, the first thing you'd see is the Temple Mount. And then once you got past the Temple Mount, then and only then would you see south and see like below you and see like the city of David. So that's it. So then in that case, you have to tear again once you see Yerushalayim. So you've already torn over the Beis HaMikdash, right? And chances are you've torn over Ari Huda also, because you had to go through Ari Huda. So you have to go that way also. So that's so you have to. So it's a strange circumstance. Okay. So that's our next question. Okay. On source number 5 here. Let me move down on the source sheet here. Okay. Okay. Kol ha-kroim ha'elu kulam biyado u'umad v'kori al-ksus shalav ad shigaz libo. Ve'enu macha kroim elu yolam aval rash ehu l'shlom u'mala l'laktem l'tafron kamin solmot. Okay, so these there's 2 different really types of kriya that we have. We have kriya over parents, or rip over parents, and then we have everybody else. Okay, and then the novelty of our Gemara and Moikata, and source number 3, was that there are actually other categories that fit along with parents, and one of them being these three places. Okay, and the uniqueness of these tears is that you have to really, it's not enough just to put a little tear in your shirt. You got to really be what's called megalis libo. You got to a rip that's so strong that it uncovers the heart. Okay, so it's like a real deep cut, and then of course, like we learned, you have to do it standing up, and you can't ever repair it. Okay, so that's so these krios are part of the destruction, are part of the more serious level of kriot. So how did it become so stringent, right? How when the rabbis were deciding how to have these tears, they looked at it and said, okay, what's going to be our model? And the model that they had was it's the model of Yerushalayim, right? Sorry, of parents, right? It's parents that's the model of. So that's an interesting thing that's what they chose. Okay. The Rambam goes on, and this is the Ravid. The Ravid disagrees with the Rambam, and he says, okay, look, some of the halachos are the same, and some of them are not. Some of them are similar to siblings, and some of them are similar to parents. So they're not all the same here. Okay. Okay, let me just see one thing here. Let's get to, okay, we're still here on the sheet. Okay, so going on to source number 8 here is number 7 where I'm at. The Rambam says, "Derech shekari adam al avi v'imo kachayev akar al rabo shalom doTorah." So I think you have to tear on your Rebbe. Val nasi val beistin val robat tzibur shenari raberchas Hashem. Okay, so this is basically just a copy of our Gemara. And source number 8. So the Rambam says, "Minayin shekarim al Ari Huda val Yerushalayim val mikdash shecharavu shnemar vayvo anashim mishchem v'mishilu mishorim shmonim ish migochei zaken v'korei begadim." Right. So the Rambam says, right? He says that we learned this from these men that came down from Shiloh and the Shomron. Okay. So we have to understand what's the debate between the Rambam and the Ravid. The Rambam had said that all the halachos of these three places, they all copy exactly like parents. And the Ravid said only some of them do. Okay? Now, the last two halachos that we saw, source number 7 and source number 8, are found in the Rambam's laws of mourning, Hilchos Evel. Okay? The laws that we learned before are found in the Rambam's laws of fasting, of Hilchos Tanios, where he discusses the different laws of the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. The Rambam wrote a book called the Mishnah Torah, where everything is categorized exactly. Okay, everything fits into its own neat category. Where it's placed inside the categories are important. How quick it's brought up and how later it's brought up. It tells you whether it's talking to the nature of the set of halachos or it's just talking about details. Okay, so the Rambam, there's really never a reason for the Rambam to repeat a set of halachos. It doesn't make any sense. In other words, if the Rambam has to tell you, like, oh, by the way, you should know something, he could just say, look back at where we already discussed this in Hilchos Tanios. But some of these halachos, the Rambam just simply repeats them. He repeats them again in Hilchos Evel, okay, the laws of mourning. So we have to understand why it is that the Rambam is repeating these halachos when he gets to the laws of mourning at the end of the Mishnah Torah, when he's already discussed them at the beginning. Okay, everybody's following? Very strange. The first time I think I've given a shiur, the first 15 minutes, no one's asked one question. Okay, good. So I guess I'm very clear. Okay, so that's where we got to so far. Okay, then we have the following. So the Rambam also, there's when you tear over these places, so it's not enough merely to tear. There are certain psukim, there's certain verses that we're told that we have to recite when we make this tear. We make these tears. But when the Rambam quotes this halacha of the tears that you have to make, he only quotes those psukim. He only quotes them in Hilchos Tanis, in the laws of fasting. He doesn't repeat them in the laws of mourning. So if you're going to bring up the halachos, so bring up the halachos, right? Say them. And if you're not going to bring them all up, so then don't bring them up at all. Why bring up only some of the halachos, right? So that's what I don't understand why the Rambam repeated it in the first place. And then once he repeated it, I don't understand why he then only repeated some of the halachos and not all of the halachos.
Okay? Rabbi,
yeah.
How frequent or infrequent does Rambam do this, right? Like restating halachas and not referencing back to this, kind of his source or his, primary location.
He does it infrequently enough that every time he does it begs the question.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how I would answer it. I mean, I don't know if there's any other way to answer it. It's pretty infrequent. But there's also, keep in mind, in the body of halacha, there's very few halachos that are applicable in more than one category, right? But I'll give you an example. Like when it comes to, let's say, the laws of oneg Shabbat, right? So eating a big meal on Shabbat, right? So the oneg Shabbat. So when it gets to the laws of Yom Tov, so there's also a mitzvah of oneg Yom Tov. So the Rambam doesn't repeat all the halachos of oneg again. He just says, just like you have oneg on Shabbat, you also have them on Yom Tov. And that tells you enough. Okay, so now I got to go look back at Hilchos Shabbat and see what the laws of oneg are to understand what I have to do on Yom Tov also. Doesn't go through the next 4 halachos, explaining them again. Okay. Okay, let's look at source number 9. This is a halacha, like we said in the if you watch the YouTube video, we said that this is something that most people know, they're familiar with, because if you're in Yerushalayim for more than 30 days, then you learn this halacha quickly. That if you've torn within 30 days, right? So then you don't have to tear again the next time you go. So if you're in Yerushalayim for 2 weeks and you go to the Kotel on day 1 of your trip and you tear, and you go back on day 10, you don't have to tear again. Okay, so it's only if you've been missing for 30 days. Once you've missed it for 30 days, then you have to tear again. I understand the halacha, right? If what's generating this sort of license not to tear, right? Where does that come from? If I have to tear, right? So if I give you an example, a horrible example, but if my mother dies on like day day Rosh Chodesh, and then my father dies 2 weeks later, I still have to tear over my father. And I'll say it's within 30 days. I already tore, so I don't have to anymore. So why is it that when it comes to this, it's different? Okay. Another question is this halacha of this like license not to have to tear again is also omitted in Hilchos Eivel. He only brings it up in Hilchos Tanis. So why is that? Okay, that's another question I have. Okay, the tour and the Prisha go into in source number 10 and 11. So he talks about seeing Ari. The tour starts off and says Haroa Ari Yisrael b'chorbanim. You see the cities of Israel in destruction. So there's two types of cities in Israel. There's cities of Israel, Yisrael, and cities of Yehuda. Okay, we'll see what the difference is between them. But so the Torah quotes if you see the Ari Yisrael. Now in the Gemara it said Ari Yehuda, not Ari Yisrael. So that begs the precious question of right if you're going to tear over them, well which one are we tearing over? Ari Yisrael, Ari Yehuda, right? Which one? The Gemara said Ari Yehuda, and the Torah comes along and he brings down the Ari Yisrael. So he says, so the Prisha in source number 11 says, and the Torah himself also repeated these halachos, just like the Rambam did in the Hilchos Eivel, and there he says Ari Huda. So he himself is contradicting himself. Right? It's not just that he's saying something different than the Gemara, he's contradicting himself also. Okay, so the Prisha says, not gonna hachalav dafka, Ari Huda dafka, right? So he says that nope. It's the Torah was just like writing. He wasn't like paying attention to what he was writing. It's interesting like explanation for him. I said, but he really meant Ari Huda. Okay, so what's the importance of Ari Huda? Why are we only tearing over Ari Huda? Why not Ari Yisrael? Ari Huda, just see on a map if you're somewhat familiar. So it's like northeast of Yerushalayim. I'm sitting in one of the Ari Huda right now, right? So that's the Ari Huda, okay, the region of Ari Huda at least. Okay. The Beis Yosef says as follows, and this is where now it starts really getting interesting. Okay, so I can see your faces, you're already interested, but this is where it really gets interesting here. Okay, it says in source number 12, there's a high Ari Yehuda b'chorbanam dekamar. Dekamar hainu shehin chorvos. Vein behem yishuv klal. Okay, so what generates us having to tear? Where's the mourning here? What's generating our obligation to tear? So he says that it's the fact that they're destroyed, right? Like chareva, chorban. But he says ve'in behem yishuv klal, that they have no one living there. So it's not enough that you see like an antique, like an archaeological site, but it has to be that no one's living there anymore, right? So for instance, Shiloh is an ancient city, destroyed. You can go see the ruins of the Mishkan and everything in Shiloh, but there are people living there also, right? Today there are people living there. Right, so he says ve'in behen yishuv klal, aval im yesh behem yishuv, afal pi shehen b'dei goyim, hayanir lechora dein tzarich likros. He says something interesting. He says, but if there are people that are living there, but it's in the hands of the goyim, right? So in other words, at first, what do we say? What destroyed means? Destroyed means no one's living there. Now, what are we saying? Now we're switching it, and we're saying that what is it? It's that people are living there, but it's also chorba, it's also destroyed if goyim are in control, right? So he says then the nira the ain't tzarich likro, right? So he says so you say maybe you shouldn't have to. Right? So he says that even if people are living there, which you might think now is not considered destroyed, right? The fact that it's in the hands of goyim means that it's still considered destroyed. Okay. So you have to understand this. So what about the factors of Yishuv, right, of people living there and in the hands of Gentiles are causing you to rip? It seemed to like if I would until I got to this point of the Beis Yosef, I thought the halacha was all about whether or not it was destroyed. Right, that's what it all centered around. Whether there's a Beis Hamikdash, it's gone. There's no Beis Hamikdash there, so I have to destroy. So what's this new idea? Okay, the Piskei Tshuva. This is an interesting new type of sefer. So he writes as follows. He quotes somebody. He says, "Far kasvu gedoli dorenu shein lismach asvar azum." Right? So he says, you see, this is like a very anti-Zionist source, right? So he says, look, it says that if no one's living there and it's under the hands of the goyim. Take a trip to Israel today. What do you see? Yerushalayim, all the Ari Huda, people are living in them, and they're in the hands of Jews. It's all good. We don't have to tear Korea anymore on the Ari Huda. Everything's fine, right? So he says, no. Because if the Jews aren't Torah Jews, if they're heretics, right? Like the Tzionim are. So then forget it. Then it's still considered just as bad as if Goyim are in control of it, and you still have to tear. Okay, so politically we can have a nice discussion about this, but what's the basic underlying svara about this, right? What's the idea that it's not? We're not talking about it being destroyed. We're not talking about people living there. We're not talking about under the hands of the Goyim. Now we're throwing in one other factor, that if heretics are in control of it, that it's still considered destroyed. So how does that fit in? Where are these guys coming from when they say such a thing? Okay. Okay. The Beis Yosef says, this is source number 14. He says, he says, V'shem Ramban. So once you see one of the Ari Huda, once you see one of them, one of the cities of Judah, and in its destruction, then you don't have to tear again. Okay, so why is that? Why don't I have to tear on every single one of the cities, right? Why is it that just seeing one is enough? Okay. Then looking at the Beis Yosef in source number 15, he says in Kar Ari Huda Chosev Kore, right? So the Beis Yosef here is going to say that what about Yerushalayim, right? If I already saw Ari Huda now, so I see one of the Ari Huda, I don't have to rip again. Okay, once I get to the next one. But once I see Yerushalayim, then I have to tear on Yerushalayim, right? So I see 10 Ari Huda in destruction. I've only torn once. Now I come to Yerushalayim. I can say it's just another city in Yehuda. So it says, nope, now you have to tear. You have to tear again. Okay. But
so is
then
there like does Jerusalem have like a higher status and therefore like different cities are considered different levels of mourning?
So we're gonna have to. The answer is gonna clear. Something's there. There has to be some differentiating factor, but the question is gonna be what is the differentiating factor? And then you've introduced an idea called higher levels. So how do we understand that category? What's the category of a higher level, and how does that relate to generating tearing? Right. So you've correctly identified the idea that there must be a differentiation between Yerushalayim and the Ari Huda. That are there
other cities besides
no.
Jerusalem? Are there other cities that you have to tear again?
No.
Rabbi, is there a comparison between like Som Gedalia and Tisha B'Av in terms of like different levels, right? Like Som Gedalia was breaching of the walls of Jerusalem. Tisha B'Av is destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Is there some similarity between the two in terms of levels?
So well, first of all, I think you're referring to Sarah Bateves or Shiur Sabatamas actually, but yeah. In any case, yeah, just to make sure we're on the mark here. But I think that what you and Nathaniel are saying that is correct is that there are different levels. That's true.
Why? Right.
But the question is, what are these levels, and what's the identity that Yerushalayim has that the Ari Huda don't share? Right. That's the question. What's the unique identity? That's what we really have to focus on.
You called it before the Makom Kodesh, right? Like the Shechina, where the closer to the resting spot or the location. I'm not.
Yeah, right. I'm saying we can all come up with right. We have to identify the true thing. Yeah, 100%.
Oh, we're not supposed to just make stuff up.
No. That's not going to be our goal here. It's not just going to be make stuff up. We're going to try to. Right. Yeah. Okay. Good. I should have mentioned that at the beginning. I'm sorry. Right. All right. Okay. So So then. So the reasoning being that Yerushalayim that the Beis Yosef gives is because we already why I don't have to tear on the Ari Huda if I already saw Yerushalayim is because Kfar Karla Kedusha Shabakul, and I already tore on the most sacred of the cities of Ari Huda being Yerushalayim, so I don't have to do it again. Okay, and then we talk about, or he says Yerushalayim Gamhu B'chal Ari Huda, or you could just say that once I saw Yerushalayim, that's already one of the Ari Huda. And now I don't have to tear of the other Ari Huda. Very logical, right? Just like we said before. Okay, good. Okay. Lastly, Rav Moshe Feinstein brought up this interesting thing. They must have come to Rav Moshe Feinstein and told him this, and then he was very perplexed by this, perplexed enough that he wrote about it. They said that there are people in Jerusalem who don't see the Temple Mount every day. Okay, they don't see the Temple Mount. Okay. So they don't see the Temple Mount every day, and they what's called and even though they don't see the Temple Mount every day or every 30 days even, they don't tear Kriya. Okay. they don't tear kriya on it. So he says it's just a strange thing. Just because they live in Jerusalem, they don't tear kriya. How can they not tear kriya just because they live in Jerusalem? So he says that it must be that they for some reason they don't take their minds off of it, and since they don't take their minds off of Jerusalem because they're living there, right? They don't take their minds off the Temple Mount, so that somehow exempts them from having to tear. He then goes ahead and says he disagrees with it, and he feels that they should tear. It doesn't matter where you live. If you haven't seen the Makom HaMikdash, the Temple Mount, in 30 days, so then you should tear no matter what. Okay, so that's the we have to understand that opinion. Okay, so we've got I've got 16 questions listed here. Okay, that we have on this Sugyah that we have to understand. But the first thing we're going to do is we're gonna put a svara. We're gonna give an explanation, and that explanation will then apply to all our questions, hopefully, and help us answer them. Okay. Does anyone have anything they want to ask or suggest themselves? Don't all throw in once. Okay. Okay, so here we go. It's first year, so people are a little nervous. Okay, I want to be the first person. Okay. So okay, as we get along the weeks, people feel more comfortable. Okay, so let's give a svara here. So what I would like to suggest the following. I'm sorry?
I have a practical question. When you say Ari Huda, does that mean like all the cities in Israel, or literally in this one location? And if so, why Ari Huda, not necessarily there are other locations in Israel?
Oh, so that's one of our questions. That was one of our questions. I didn't hear you. Wait, say your first question again. The second question was one of our questions. But what was your first question?
Ari Huda is specifically a location in Israel, like the Yehuda.
Yeah, it's in the Yehuda region. All the cities in the Yehuda region.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, what's today's what they call Judea?
Yeah.
Right. So it was the cities of Judea. Okay. So, is there anything else? Okay. So here we go. So let's look at the here's my explanation for the halacha as a whole. Okay, the halacha as a whole. What I would like to suggest is that there are two aspects to tearing kriya on the churva, on the destruction. Okay, there's a national tragedy, what happened to us as a nation, that with the destruction of Yerushalayim, of the Ari Huda and the Beis HaMikdash. And then there's also a personal tragedy that occurs to each of us based on these three things. Okay, based on these three places being destroyed. So again, there's a national tragedy and then there's a personal tragedy, and both of them have to be commemorated and reacted to in an appropriate manner. Okay, and that's what's going to generate all of these halachos. They're either going to be generated by the national tragedy or by the personal tragedy that occurs. And Chazal are going to suggest both of them as we go through the halachos. Okay. So let's explain here. Okay. So we're going to look at source number 17 here. Okay. In source number 17, so it says as follows. This is Ramosha Feinstein. Okay. And Ramosha Feinstein says as follows. He says, "Ra'iti b'sefer Ira Kodesh v'Mikdash Lagon Rav Tukachinsky." He says, "The mistapek im hakriya hi lahafil levatzar." He's not sure if the reason why we tear kriya is in order to get somebody to feel the pain. I mean, let's be honest. How many of us, when we go to the kotel, we feel an ounce of pain? It's usually a joyous occasion, right? We're at the kotel. It's exciting, right? So, but really, that should be a place of tremendous pain. So how do we do it? We rip, and that causes us pain. Right? So he says that you have this with a katan, with a katan that we sometimes tear over like a child in order to bring out the pain. Okay, so then the Rashi explains so people will start to cry. So the Moshe says that's not how I see this at all. I don't see that that's the reason. Because really, let's be honest, when it comes to kriya in general, there's no real mitzvah to feel pain over when somebody dies. It's not a mitzvah. That's a natural reaction. But there's no mitzvah to feel pain. You have mitzvahs of how to act, right? But there's no mitzvah, so there's no reason for us to have halachos centered around trying to get us to a level that's not really a mitzvah in the first place. Okay, so he says, Shego bocha adam kasher mochel mo kavonasav shemasik atam b'shvil kavod shasa. Okay, so Ramosh is suggesting here, he's saying that there's really two ways of understanding Kriya in general. One is in order to inspire feelings of sadness, which he doesn't see as the reasoning. Or the second way is it's a method of honoring the person that died. Okay, the way of a method of honoring the person that died is by tearing by tearing clothing, something valuable to you, and that shows just how much this person meant to you, and that's why you have to do it. It's out of honor. Okay. Let's look at here. This is let's look at what the Beis HaMikdash, what the Makom HaMikdash was. Okay, what was the Temple Mount that it's such an important place to us? So the Rambam says, Mesoros Bi'ad HaKol, this is source number 18. Sha'makom shabana bo David Shlomo HaMizbeach begoren Arona, hu ha'makom shabana Avram HaMizbeach v'karolav Yitzchak. Okay, so the Makom HaMikdash where Shlomo and David HaMelech put the Mizbeach and built the Beis HaMikdash, so that was where Avram placed his Mizbeach, okay, his right, and where Yitzchak was during the Akedah, where Yitzchak was placed onto the Mizbeach. That's the place where Noach built his Mizbeach when he came out of the Teva. And that's where Cain and Hevel gave their korban, right? Right? And Adam was born from that place, and that's where he gave his korban, right? And the Chazal had this famous saying that the place where men came from, right, the place where they were born, was the place of their eventual atonement, right, referring to the Mizbeach and the Beis HaMikdash. Okay, he says, "V'lama ani omer b'mikdash Yerushalayim kedusha rishona kedusha lasilavo." Right, so this is a famous Rambam that he talks about that there's certain places that we captured that have sanctity forever, and certain places the sanctity doesn't last forever. He says, "Lama ani omer b'mikdash Yerushalayim kedusha rishona kedusha lasilavo kedusha shar Eretz Yisrael linyan shvius u'masros chutz v'hem lo kedusha lasilavo." So the Mikdash in Yerushalayim always have Kedusha. Today they have just as much Kedusha as they had back then. But where I'm sitting today doesn't have the same level of Kedusha anymore. Okay, that Kedusha ran out. And so what's the ramifications of Kedusha running out? There's some spiritual things. So it's not just a spiritual thing. There are halachos regarding Shemitah and things of that nature that aren't the same, but whether or not the Kedusha extends past the destruction. Okay, but the Mikdash and Yerushalayim, the Kedusha is everlasting. What generates the Kedusha in Yerushalayim and the Beis HaMikdash? The fact that the Shechina is manifest there. Okay, and that is never negated. That never ends. Okay? Right, even though the places were destroyed, in the Kedusha lasts, right? Referring to Yerushalayim and the Beis HaMikdash. Right? What generated the Kedusha of the rest of Eretz Yisrael? So that was the fact that Bnei Yisrael conquered it. But once the conquering never ran out because we lost the land, right? So once the land was taken from us, right? So then the Kedusha ran out, because the only reason why the land had Kedusha was because we conquered it. So Yerushalayim and the Beis HaMikdash have one level of Kedusha that's everlasting, because their Kedusha stems from the Shechina, and the rest of Eretz Yisrael, its Kedusha only comes from the fact that we conquered it. And once that runs out, that's it. Right, so okay. Became inshallah Ezra v'kadsha v'lokitsha b'kibush alo chazaka shechaziku ba. V'chach kol makom shechaziku ba olei bava v'nikdash b'kedushas Ezra shniya he mekudash hayom v'afal pi shenechal cha'aretz v'mena v'chay v'shviyas v'maisros haderech shebiarnu. Okay, so and he goes on to whether or not when Ezra conquered it, whether or not that reinstituted its kedusha. Okay. The Rambam in his Parish Mishnayos in Zvachim in source number 20 says as follows: Kares Yushalayim Nachla beglak kfiyas kedushasa b'kiyum li'olam v'aleha amar navi v'nachlas li'olam yazov. Okay, the Rambam says that the Yerushalayim has its kedusha forever, and the Navi says that its portion will never run out. Right, so right, Lefisha Kvar Amar b'tchilas anyin ki Hashem bachar is Yerushalayim shchinasa. Hashem chose Jerusalem for His shchina, u'bachar is Yisrael lo yisal skoni. He chose the Jewish people for them to be their treasured people. Okay, It goes on, source number 21. Psukim in Yeshayahu. Okay, and the Radak explains in source number 22. V'yorinu midarchav kimitzion teitzei Torah. Zed divrei hanavi lo divrei amim. Klomer lama yamru amim lechu b'na'alev v'yorinu midarchav kimitzion teitzei Torah. Yerushalayim has this idea that Torah comes from Yerushalayim. Okay, makom ashchina, makom nevuah, makom Torah. Okay, so kimitzion, this is the place of Torah. So Yerushalayim, so the makom hamikdash's kedusha stems from the Shechina. Yerushalayim, same thing, but also its kedusha stems from the fact that it's the place of Torah. What about the Ari Huda? This goes to Daniel's question before. What's so special about the cities of Yehuda? So this is source number 24. Okay, so in source number 24 we see it says Ki makom asher bachar Hashem Elokechem mikol shiftechem asum et shmo sham v'shichnot tijushu v'asa shama. The Gemara says Ein ma'avirin es hashanim ela b'Yehuda. Right, there's certain halachos that only take place in the cities of Yehuda. Those cities were unique. They were special. When you talked about leaping the year, right? We don't have a set leap year in really it should be done by the Beis Din at that specific time where it's needed. So here we say, right? So this is the place that was only in Ari Huda, right? Rashi explains in source number 26. So also there's an idea that the Shechina rests in Yehuda. So these cities, okay, if you look at the Rambam, right? So okay, and the Pasa Shulchan explains this is really where you see it, source number 28. So if you're gonna look at one source, this is where you should look here. He says, Haroa v'lo al Ari Yisrael, the lav gaf dafka kator b'gemara b'Rambam b'Arif, hakol Ari Yehuda niskar, the sham ikram luchaisa. The cities of Yehuda. Okay, I know we just ran through a lot of sources there, and I apologize. The cities of Yehuda were the cities where the royalty lasted. This is where the royalty was. I'm actually looking at like a palace that was lasting from the times of the Chashmonaim. So these were the areas where the royalty were. Okay, this is where the royalty is where they hung out. So that was the uniqueness. So again, one more time, uniqueness of the Makom HaMikdash was that's where the Shechina was. Yerushalayim shares that same identity, but also the place where Torah comes from. That was the seat of the Sanhedrin, right? So that's where Torah was taught from. And then lastly, Ari Huda was the cities of royalty. Okay, now let's answer our questions now. Okay, everybody's good? Everybody's following? Okay, so now we're going to take that information, those explanations that we gave, and now we're going to apply it to our questions. Okay, good? I'm assuming everybody's okay with that. Okay, so he says as follows. What about the three places, Ari Huda, Yerushalayim, and the Mikdash, require us to tear? Okay, what about them generates the obligation for us to tear? So all three of these places had their own levels of sanctity, their own levels of Kedusha, and therefore, remember our svara was that there is a national tragedy and a personal tragedy. So all three of these levels are places that require their own level of recognition. Okay, what about these three places requires a tear for each place? Okay, why can't you just tear for one of them and be okay with the others, right? So again, each place is unique and it can't be covered by the other. The cities of Yehuda, right, are places of royalty. Yerushalayim is a place of Kedusha and the direction of the Torah to the world. And the Makom HaMikdash was this place of everlasting Kedusha because of the Shechina. Okay, now what about Yerushalayim requires you to tear again, right, upon seeing Yerushalayim after having seen the Makom HaMikdash, right? So, and what about seeing Yerushalayim requires, right, so the tearing, right, that after you're already torn on the Mikdash, you still have to tear on Yerushalayim. So because Yerushalayim has its own identity and its own Kedusha, okay, so since it has its own identity, its own Kedusha, so therefore it requires its own tearing. Okay, that's the idea. It's not enough just to simply have a tear on the other cities of Yehuda, and it's definitely not enough. Even the Beis HaMikdash isn't enough because it's two different identities. It's two different tragedies that occurred, and those two different tragedies have to be recognized on their own. Okay. Now, this is where we see our svara really play itself out. Okay, this is where it's going to manifest itself. Because up till now, we could have just simply said it's a national tragedy, and that answers all our questions. And each of these three different places have their own national tragedy. But why would it be that the tearing that we're going to have is at the same level as the tearing over parents? It doesn't. You can't say, oh, because it's so serious. The Kedusha is so serious. But hold on a second. But what about a sibling? right? If I lose a sibling, so then I have to tear kriya, but not as serious as my parents. So what's the idea here? So what I think is that this is where we see the second idea of churba, the second idea of destruction. Here, what you have is there's a personal level of mourning, okay, that mimics the loss of the parents when it comes to these three places. Okay, it's this personal level of mourning that the Chazal instituted for us. Right? Chazal said it's not enough just that we recognize the national tragedy. The destruction of these three places is a personal tragedy to us as well. That personal tragedy is at such a stringent level that we're going to have the kriya mimic the kriya of a parent. And that's the idea. That's why you have to have a kriya at the level of a parent, okay? But then what about the Ravid? The Ravid came along and said, well, it's only some of the halachos that mimic it, okay? So the Ravid says, hold on a second, no, there's no idea of a personal tragedy. And this is how I want to explain the machokas between the Rambam and the Ravid. The Rambam understands this idea, and he maintains this idea of that there's a duality to the tragedy. There's the national tragedy, and then there's the personal tragedy. But the Ravid doesn't hold of this. The Ravid says all you have here is a national tragedy. And Chazal instituted certain aspects of the Kriya to show just how strict the national tragedy is, just how meaningful and how devastating it was. So one or two aspects of the halachos of a tearing over a parent, we're going to have you mimic, but not the entire thing, of course, because it's not that great of a tragedy, right? It's not a parent tragedy. There's no personal loss here. The Rambam says, no, there's two ideas here. There's two types of tragedies. There's the national tragedy and there's the personal tragedy. And that's the debate between the Rambam and the Ravid. And it manifests itself on a practical level about whether or not all the halachos apply or not. Okay. Why does the Rambam bring up some of the halachos in Hilchos Tanis and then repeat some of them in Hilchos Eivel? So I'm sure if you think about this for a second now, it'll make perfect sense to you, right? When we talk about the laws of fasting and the laws of the destruction, so what are those laws addressing? Those are addressing national tragedies. It's the laws of the national tragedy, of the fasting. These are the things that we fast over. We fast over things that don't apply to us as individuals, they apply to the nation. Hilchos Eivel, the laws of mourning, exactly the opposite. The laws of mourning are only personal laws, right? Those are only the personal laws. So the Rambam repeats the halachos to explain to us that there's two aspects to these halachos. There's the aspect of a national tragedy, that's Hilchos Tanis, and then he has to repeat the halachos to show us that there's a personal level of tragedy as well, okay? But why doesn't the Rambam quote all of the halachos, right? Why doesn't he say all of the halachos? Remember, only some of the halachos he repeated in Hilchos Eivel, right? So for instance, the psukim that you recite when you tear, he only listed in Hilchos Tanis. Why? Because the psukim address the national tragedy. They don't address the personal tragedy. So where's their place when you're categorizing those halachos? Those halachos will only be in Hilchos Tanis, where it's discussing the national tragedy. But they're not going to be in Hilchos Eivel, where it's discussing the personal tragedy, because those psukim address the nation. They address the devastation that the nation had as a whole. Okay. What about the halacha? I might be going too quickly here. I don't know, but I'm plowing through here. So what about the halachos that you don't have to tear if you saw it within 30 days, right? How come if I saw these places, I don't have to tear within 30 days, right? And why, again, doesn't the Rambam mention this in Hilchos Eivel? Okay, so this law, right, stems from the fact it's a recognition of the destruction on a national level, okay? That recognition is only required periodically. It's not required every single day. It's not something that's personal. So it's only periodically we have to recognize the tragedy that happened to us on a national level, okay? What's the importance? This goes to Daniel's question of Ari Huda over Ari Yisrael. The cities of Yehuda were the cities of the royalty, and where it had certain halachic significance that only certain halachos could happen in Ari Yehuda, like leaping the year, right? So the cities of Yisrael did not, right? The cities of Yisrael, okay, it's a devastation, it's a tragedy that they were destroyed, but they didn't have this national significance. So there wasn't a reason to institute mourning and kriya over them. Okay, now this is the crux of the matter. What about the Beis Yosef, where he sort of like vacillated between the idea of Maybe it's the fact that the cities were destroyed. Maybe it's the fact that the cities were nobody lived in them. Maybe it was the fact that the goyim are in control, right? So how do we understand all these things? Okay, so the question relates to national devastation and what defines that level, right? So is it the lack of yishuv? Is it the fact that nobody's living there? Right? So is destruction defined by the purpose of Eretz Yisrael, which is to be settled by the Jewish people, right? And therefore, when it's not settled, it's considered destroyed. Or are we talking about, no, it's talking about under the hands of other nations, right? So, which is the one thing that's really the only thing that's going to change when Mashiach happens, right? Is that we're no longer under the hands of other nations. So as long as the land is controlled by other nations, so then it's still considered destroyed, right? And therefore, there's the sign of destruction. So it's all a question of what exactly are we addressing? How are we defining what the national devastation is? Is the national devastation where Eretz Yisrael is losing its persona, it's losing its purpose, which is the fact that it should be settled? Or is it the fact that we're recognizing the fact that we're in Gullus, that we're still in this level of destruction because we're still under the hands of the Goyim? And that's why the Beis Yosef is vacillating between them and trying to understand exactly and grappling what it should be. Okay. Now, what about this idea of if the heretics control it, right? So what's the idea? So the idea is as follows: is that as long as the land is not controlled by people who consider Torah and mitzvos as the direction, as the value system by which we go on, so that's still a reflection of this national tragedy. So just like by the fact that there's a Jewish flag flying over it and there's Jewish soldiers protecting it, doesn't mean that we're outside of the tragedy of the destruction, which is something that it's very understandable. It seemed like it was like this extreme, idea before, but it's not really that extreme of a position. Okay. Next question. What about seeing just one city in Ari Huda and ripping exempts you from ripping when you see other cities? So all the cities of Yehuda share one level of significance. So you've seen one of them, right? And then you saw that Kedusha was destroyed. So there's no reason to have to repeat that recognition when you're seeing the exact same thing. But the three cities, right? The three levels are different because they're unique in terms of what makes them unique. The Shechina and the Har Habayis, right? And then the Shechina and the Torah that comes from Yerushalayim, and then the idea of royalty and certain halachos from the cities. Okay, and that's why even though Yerushalayim is considered one of the Ari Huda, if I've seen the Ari Huda and I see Yerushalayim, I still have to rip. Okay. Okay. Now, what about this thing with Ramosha? That Ramosha, if he brought up the idea that people who live in Yerushalayim don't tear upon seeing the Makom HaMikdash, right? So those people maintain that it's only a national tragedy. There's no personal tragedy. And so as residents of Yerushalayim, they're always exposed to the national tragedy. So they don't have to tear again. There's no real reason to tear again. Okay. That's the shiur. We've got like 2 minutes left. So let me just sum up very quickly. We saw a tremendous amount of halachos about tearing. We saw a lot of different things. They generated a lot of different questions. And what we came down to was one essential idea. The one essential idea is that there are two aspects to the obligation to rip over the destruction of Ari Huda, of Yerushalayim, and the Makom HaMikdash. There's a national tragedy that occurs when these cities were destroyed, but on a personal level, there's also a personal tragedy that occurs. It's something that we're each lacking because of it. And Chazal set up the halachos as such that both tragedies have to be recognized in our actions. And they instituted different halachos to ensure that we would recognize both. And like Rav Moshe Feinstein said, these were signs of honor, signs of kavod that were given. That's why we tear kriya, because it's a sign of honor to both these tragedies and what we're lacking without them. Okay. In most weeks, I'll probably have more time to stick around. I just have another speaking thing in 5 minutes I have to get ready for. But if anybody has any questions, and I really apologize for running. I see that people have questions. But if anybody has any questions, so please feel free to send them in the WhatsApp. You can send them as a voice thing if it's easier. But then I'll address them throughout the week, and we'll continue our learning. Hopefully, with B'li Neder, I'll post next week's sources today on the next topic, and then I'll film a shiur throughout the week, and I hope that you stick. I hope you come back next week. I recognize some people, it's going to taper off at some point, but I hope that everybody continues. I hope we get to do this throughout the entire year. I hope we get to learn Torah together. Okay, have a very good week, everybody, and be in touch. And please don't hesitate to ask questions and send me questions and send me thoughts that you have or your own ideas, and especially if you disagree with me. So please send those in. Those are the most interesting. Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thanks. See you guys.